And welcome back. You are watching WION The World is One. I'm Eric Njoka. Let's head back to Washington, D.C. at the White House, where Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt is taking questions from the press.
Caroline, a question about the Strait of Hormuz. If these negotiations are not successful, is the only option to reopen the strait in boots on the ground, given that all of our allies have essentially said that they are unable or unwilling to help?
Look, that's a hypothetical question. It's a hypothetical question. It's also a decision that would have to be made by the commander-in-chief, and I'm not going to get ahead of him.
And in addition to that, when it comes to the Vice President, J.D. Vance, what has changed that has made him more of an active participant in these negotiations with Iran?
I don't think anything has changed. The Vice President has always been a key member, the President's right-hand man, and a key member of the President's national security team. He's been part of these discussions throughout this entire course of the administration with respect, again, to the 12-day war that the President and his national security team negotiated a solution to, with respect to the ceasefire between Israel and Gaza and the release of the hostages, which there was a lot of criticism that couldn't get done, and it did. The Vice President has been by the President's side every step of the way, and any reporting otherwise is just completely false. I see him in the room. Again, the President seeks his counsel on all matters, both foreign and domestic.
Can you just tell us who exactly the U.S. is negotiating with in Iran, and why the U.S. and this administration trusts that person?
Again, as I said to Gabe's question earlier, we're not going to get into the details of these negotiations and conversations that continue to take place. As of course you can imagine, they are very sensitive diplomatic discussions. And I would reiterate, I do recall giving all of you the same answer when we were negotiating the ceasefire between Israel and Gaza. Gave you the same answer throughout the 12-day war between Iran and Israel. Gave you the same answer with respect to many of the other global conflicts that this administration has negotiated solutions to. President Trump is going to give his diplomats the freedom that they need to have these sensitive diplomatic discussions without negotiating and litigating them through the news media. Fran.
Just to follow up, though, because you said that some of the information that's been out there about the 15-point plan is inaccurate, can you say what is accurate with respect to ballistic missiles, the nuclear ambitions, and the Strait of Hormuz, which are things that the President has laid out that he wants to see a couple times in the past?
Look, if you've heard it from the President of the United States, obviously it's true, as well as the objectives of Operation Epic Fury. We've said repeatedly, I've said them from this podium, the Pentagon has reiterated them. That's why we've taken military action to achieve them. So of course, those are goals that we want to see, but this full 15-point plan that's been floating around in many of your outlets, there's a lot of misinformation to that as well. And again, I would caution you from taking things from anonymous sources rather than verifying them directly with the White House. Christian.
Thanks, Caroline. Two on Iran. First, would the President consider loosening asylum restrictions for Iranians trying to flee the country right now?
Again, that's a question for the President. I won't get ahead of him on that. I haven't talked to him about that.
Okay. And then secondly, you mentioned at the top that Iran would be hit harder than they have been to this point if they don't recognize the fact that they're losing this war. Could those strikes happen before this 5-day negotiating window closes if the President doesn't think they're negotiating in good faith?
You're asking me to tell you if the Commander-in-Chief would authorize very strong strikes against the Iranian regime. That's not something I would ever reveal from this podium, true or not. Phil.
Thank you, Caroline. I was wondering if you would respond to some of this criticism of the administration from past allies like Joe Kent, who have said that the President's red line shifted from Iran cannot obtain a nuclear weapon to Iran cannot pursue nuclear enrichment. What is the administration's response to that criticism?
I think the President and I have both strongly responded to the criticism by Mr. Kent, who unfortunately resigned in disgrace and accused the President of basically being controlled by foreign countries and foreign manipulation, which is a ridiculous and laughable assertion. So his accusations have zero credibility as far as this White House is concerned.
The question of the red line shifting from no nuclear weapon to no nuclear enrichment, is there any substance to that argument?
I think the President has been quite clear in what he wants to see from the Iranian regime, which is why he chose to launch Operation Epic Fury in the first place. Reagan.
Caroline, I have a question for you on the SAVE Act, and I'd like to follow up on the DHS shutdown.
Sure.
First, Senator Mike Lee.
The Save America Act.
Save America Act. The President corrected me yesterday. It was my fault. Senator Mike Lee said it's essentially impossible to pass the Save America Act through reconciliation. What's your reaction to that? Is the president worried that that strategy might fail?
I think he's willing to try all strategies. I spoke with him about this yesterday, and he said if we can make it work through reconciliation, let's absolutely do that. These, again, are common sense policies that are backed by the vast majority of voters across this country. The only people in this country who don't support them are politicians on Capitol Hill, and you all should ask them why they don't want voter ID, why they don't want proof of citizenship to vote in our nation's elections. Again, these are common sense proposals that are wildly popular, and the president is willing to use any means necessary to get this legislation passed and onto his desk.
And then on the DHS shutdown, do you expect deportations to decrease while ICE is in the airports? And what are the trade-offs of having ICE in the airports right now?
Well, to address this obviously short-term problem and the chaos that has been sowed by these Democrats on Capitol Hill, to address the lines and to get Americans traveling and get them to where they need to be. So the president, I think this was a creative solution, again, that was criticized, but we have seen wait times decrease, not as much as we'd like. Hopefully they will continue to, but at major airports over the course of the last few days as ICE has been facilitating with travelers in these airports.
Sure, Caroline.
Thank you, Caroline. On March 6th, the president said in an interview with Reuters that the U.S. should have a role in choosing Iran's next leadership. Now that we're almost 4 weeks into the operation, is that still the president's assessment of where it should go?
As I've said repeatedly, I think the president obviously believes the United States wants to have someone in leadership position in the Iranian regime that will be much more favorable, that will be willing to work with the United States, that will no longer chant death to America. These would obviously be good common sense things for the United States and for our allies. I think that's what the president meant when he spoke with Reuters that day. Go ahead.
The president yesterday said that he had achieved regime change in Iran because the regime has changed. In terms of...
I mean, has it not?
Well, the leadership...
Their entire leadership has been killed, and nobody has really seen or legitimately heard from this alleged new leader. So wouldn't you say there's been a change in the regime?
There has been a change in leadership. I mean, do you feel as though...
There's been a change in the regime leadership, which is what the president said. So thank you for confirming he was right.
I mean, do you feel as though you've achieved leadership level, or the personnel in place right now in Iran that you're satisfied with? I mean, have you...
I think it's too soon to say.
In terms of highly enriched uranium in Iran right now, is your expectation, I mean, the stated desire of the president has been to prevent nuclear weapons. Is your expectation that the end game here is that eventually Americans will be in possession of that uranium, or you'll somehow have some direct control over the highly enriched uranium that could be used to develop it?
Again, this is a point of conversation that continues. I think you know the means in which the United States would have to take in order to achieve that goal, and that's a decision for the president to make. Brian, good to see you, Brian Glenn.
Good to see you as well. Does the White House have a comment on a letter that was sent from Congressman Raskin to the DOJ alleging that the DOJ recklessly released damning information in regards to President Trump's documents?
Yes, I saw that letter from Congressman Raskin this morning, who I would add has zero credibility, and this letter was clearly a cheap political stunt. What the congressman did here, Brian, and for everyone in the room who's hopefully not reporting on this as fact, is that he took untrue and salacious claims in a memo that was produced by Jack Smith, who has been completely discredited for his lawfare and his witch hunts against this president, and that information was unverified. It never even made it into the indictment because it was so unverified. And what happened to that indictment anyway? It was thrown out. And Jack Smith has been proven, again, to be a prosecutor on a witch hunt against President Trump. He tried to throw him in jail ahead of the 2024 election. The Biden Department of Justice was fully on board with this lawfare campaign. And in fact, this story that was concocted by Congressman Raskin was so ridiculous, I understand his communications team reached out to some outlets in this room who responsibly said, we're not going to write this because this is just too much. However, of course, MS Now did write that story this morning because they continue to be left-wing propaganda for the Democrat Party. But I think Jack Smith has been proven to be a liar and a fraud, and this is, again, a cheap political stunt from a Democrat on Capitol Hill who I think wants to get himself on cable television. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Press Secretary. That is White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. She's just addressed the press at the White House in Washington, D.C. Susan Teherani is our correspondent. She is in New York. She's on the phone right now. Susan, listening to what Caroline Leavitt did say to the press there, she did indicate that the Operation Epic Fury is continuing, and anything in regards to the talks between Iran and the United States should be directed to the president. She really did not want to answer that.
Yeah, she definitely didn't want to answer who the Americans are talking with in Iran, and she also didn't want to talk about rules of engagement and how the United States is operating. But she also made very clear to take that 15-point plan that some media outlets put out on the part of the United States with a grain of salt. She said there is some truth to it, the proposal that the United States sent to Iran. But she also said, which I thought was interesting, that they have not officially received an answer from the Iranians. That's something that Reuters was also reporting, despite the fact that Iranian media said Iran has outright rejected any kind of condition set by the United States. And now we're hearing that the Iranians are reviewing it. That's what Leavitt said. So it seems that those negotiations, at least as far as the United States is concerned, are continuing, but also the attacks against Iran are continuing as well. The military strikes have not abated in any sort of way. So a lot of things were made clear, but as you mentioned, there was a lot that Leavitt tried to sort of downplay or not talk about either.
Also, something that came up from this press conference by Caroline Leavitt is a visit by President Trump to China, which is on May 14th and 15th. Susan.
Yeah, so that meeting that was supposed to take place in March, and then they said it's going to be at a later date. Now we know, according to Leavitt, that because the president wants to be here for the duration of this conflict, he has to be in the United States. They postponed it for May, and then we heard from the White House that after that, she and his wife at a later time will visit the United States as well. But I think that's sort of an indication that this war is going to continue at least for the next several weeks.
All right. Susan Teherani is our correspondent in New York. Thank you, Susan.